Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight I have a collection of horror stories for your listening pleasure. Be sure to subscribe if you enjoy this kind of content, as I post 3 times a week with new stories every Tuesday and Thursday and a big compilation on Saturdays. I also have an app with over, 3,500 stories for you to listen to of even more spooky content, which you can find a link to in the description. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Sometime in late 2019, I started seeing someone called Simon. He seemed nice enough and was generally what appeared to be a somewhat normal guy. He kept insisting that we move in together despite dating for only a few months, and the fact that I already owned a house. That should have been enough to tell me to run, but I didn't. Simon started showing up at my house late at night without announcing himself or asking to be invited. At first it wasn't that bad, but it became nightly. Then he started lying for attention, even going as far as to claim a close friend had died. No, a close friend hadn't died. He'd show up drunk and demanding attention and refuse to leave my house or follow my rules. If I didn't let him, he'd refuse to leave. Long story short, his behavior kept getting worse, showing up drunk and being at bars all night during COVID, demanding my attention despite knowing I'm high risk. He tried one last time to get into my home, and I cut it off right there. I told him to leave me be. The next morning, I got a call at 5 a.m. to come into work on my day off. I was annoyed, but agreed. Then the calls started non-stop. I'd tell him to leave me alone and hang up again and again. When it was time to leave for work, I assumed it was my boss calling me to tell me he was there to pick me up. It wasn't. It was Simon. "Well, your boss is here for you," and the phone clicked. Sure enough, 7 a.m., and he was camped out on my porch and tried to grab me in broad daylight in front of my boss. This kind of behavior went on for nearly a week. My employees refused to let me walk home after he started showing up at my place of work, and closing time would try and cut me off when trying to get into my house. I found out he kept calling because he would hear my phone ring through the thin walls of my own home, trying to locate exactly where I was. Every day, I'd have at least 20 phone calls and 50 texts. I finally called the police after he threatened that I was too poor for a restraining order. The cop drew the line right there and took it as a direct threat to my well-being. When I got home that day, I noticed cigarette ash all over my porch and a hole burnt into my patio chair. Soon after, I found a window in the basement that he'd forced open with a surgical mask on the floor. I told my roommate and my neighbors what had been going on and gave a description of Simon and that they needed to be on the lookout. Things quietened down, and after a few months, the phone calls from VPNs had finally stopped. I was in the car with my housemate earlier this week and mentioned a smudge on the garage door. He parks in front of the garage, not in it, when he told me, "Yeah, I think a homeless guy was squatting in there for a while, probably weeks. I found a bunch of clothes in there, and then they all disappeared a few weeks ago." My heart dropped into my stomach. I noticed tracks in the snow too big for my housemate to have left, but thought, no way. Couldn't be. I was shoveling snow all through the night for my neighbors all winter, and he was literally within arm's reach of me, able to see directly into the window of my house. And yes, I scolded my housemate. I get that he's a guy and doesn't really get it when a woman says he's dangerous, call the cops if anything weird happens around the house, but come on, man. Simon, I know you're still around, and let's not meet again for your sake. At the time, I was a 17-year-old female, and I started a job last summer working at a local hole-in-the-wall pet store in my city. They were grossly understaffed with only 7 employees. Not only that, but I was the only girl, and the only employee under the age of 22. I was very naive and trusting of people at the time and constantly gave people the benefit of the doubt. After working there, my mindset changed drastically. A lot of the customers were really predatory towards me, and I could make an entirely different post about that. But today I'm going to talk to you about 2 of my co-workers, Mike and Jim. Mike was seemingly nice, albeit a little weird. He was super tall and skinny, and honestly could have passed as a 20-year-old stoner. Jim was a retired army veteran who wasn't technically an employee but volunteered there in his free time. He was also very tall, had some piercings and a shaved head. Jim and Mike were close friends and actually lived together. I'd strike up conversations with both of them when work was slow, and wasn't intimidated by them at all. My first red flag. My first day of working there, I was taking out the trash and had to open the garage at the back of the store to get the trash bin. I asked Mike for help, since I wasn't strong enough to lift it. He said, "It's not that you're not strong, you're just small. You wear it well though," and looked me up and down. Weird, but I thought he was just trying to be nice. My third day working, Mike and I were the only ones closing the store. We were making small talk. He told me he was 32 and that he had 3 kids with 3 different women, then proceeded to tell me in vivid detail how each of these kids were conceived. Like super personal stuff you wouldn't be telling a coworker, much less someone you knew for 3 days. Weird, but he was a weird dude, and I thought perhaps he was just very bad at picking up on social cues. Mike would also walk me to my car a lot after work. We were usually the only ones closing, and it was always dark. At first I thought it was a really kind thing to do. We would talk for a bit and I'd get in and drive off, but he would talk to me for longer periods of time each day. He would walk out and sit on the curb near my car, lighting a cigarette and inviting me to join him. I'd politely decline because I didn't want him to know that I smoked. I was worried about my reputation. Lol. One day he actually put his hand on my car door after I opened it, holding it open so that I could shut it. I made some excuse to leave and he let go. I thought it was just an accident that he didn't realize he was holding it open. I was constantly making excuses for him. A few days later I heard Mike talking to a customer. I had no idea on the context, but I heard Mike say, "If an underage girl and a guy are together, right, the girl should be charged with something. When I went to court, they couldn't arrest me because the girl was blackmailing me." I seriously can't make this up. I met Jim after working there about a week and a half. He had a super dry and sarcastic sense of humor, and I honestly used that to excuse a lot of the things he said to me. When he found out I was 17, assuming Mike told him, he would always make fun of me saying things like, "Isn't it past your bedtime?" or whatever. I thought it was funny. I'd call him an old man even though he was only 35 and we'd joke around. One day I forgot to do one of my pre-closing duties, but Jim told me he would take care of it. I was super apologetic about it, and he puts his hands on my arm and said, "At least you're good to look at." I laughed it off. He would constantly make comments about my appearance, telling me my shirt was too tight or that I looked a lot older than I should. It started getting more serious. One time I signed my name for the pre-closing checklist, and Jim picked it up. He was like, "Oh, I now know your last name. Could totally stalk you if I wanted." Another co-worker heard him and was like, "Dude, at least wait till she's 18. Jim turned and asked me, "How long till you're 18 then?" I told him around 2 months and he was just like, "Nah, I can't wait that long." The next day Jim came in. He looked at me and asked if I drove a green car. I said I did. He then recited my license plate back to me. "Told you I was going to stalk ya." This definitely made alarm bells go off in my head, but I desperately wanted to believe it was all part of a joke. Even remembering this part gives me chills. After this incident, there were multiple times that I was followed after leaving work by a white car. Luckily, my work was in the downtown area of my city, and I lived very far west, so most of the time I lost the car before I even got near home. Though one time, the car did follow me all the way out to my neighborhood. Instead of entering my neighborhood, I just kept driving and ended up in the countryside outside the city. I'm very familiar with this area and was able to lose the car out there. It was easily one of the most terrifying moments of my life. I have no proof this was Jim, since he never closed the store, and I didn't know what car he drove. It only happened while I was leaving work, and it stopped after I quit. I put in my 2 weeks' notice after about a month working there, unrelated to the creepiness. Once Mike and Jim found out I was leaving, they'd tell me how much they'd miss me, and kept inviting me over to their house for co-worker game night, where they'd have everyone play board games and such. I reminded them that I was 17 and couldn't drink. They told me they didn't care and that I could probably drink anyway. Mike constantly asked for my phone number to set up a time for game night, but I always ended up getting distracted with something else before I could. My last day working there, I was closing with Mike and he was like, "Bet your boyfriend's happy you don't have to work with me and Jim anymore." Like an idiot, I told him I didn't have one. I asked him why he said that. "Well, me and Jim are kinda creeps. We take the pride of being creepy. It's like running a competition between us." The rest of the closing time, he was all over me, touching me, not in a sexual way, walking right up to me and essentially putting his body against mine. At one point, I was leaning against the counter, and he put his hand on either side of me and was towering over me, trapping me there. He said, "We're never going to have another girl working here like you." I left quickly after that. I was driving home and finally added up the behavior and comments and connected the dots. I couldn't believe I was so oblivious. I genuinely think that if I kept working there, something a lot worse would have happened. This starts off with an unfortunate incident that I don't really like to admit, but when I was in 7th grade, I had my first and only hookup. Nothing major happened, but it was enough to make me realize that I didn't want to be involved in that kind of thing, and was a pretty huge prude from that point on. The guy this involves, his friend and my friend and I, had all grown up in the same neighborhood, but I had moved to a different neighborhood a few years before, and didn't know the guys as well as she did. I'm hanging out with a friend called Kate at her house, and she says, "Let's hang out with Caleb and Luke." I agree. We go to Luke's house where Caleb was also hanging out. We get there and there's nothing weird at first, and Kate goes, "Hey, so Caleb thinks you're really cute." At this point in my life, where I was very desperate for the approval of others, I was not popular and not many guys had ever been interested in me, so I was very excited about this. Caleb was on the varsity football team which I was cheerleader for, and he was also admittedly attractive. I couldn't believe he was interested in me, and it clouded my already 13-year-old level judgment. We all go upstairs, and this is where things get weird. The guys literally started putting on some explicit content and watched it in front of us, like literal DVDs. I was weirded out, but again, I had no experience with guys, and it didn't bother me as much as it should have. I was desperate to prove to this guy that I was cool, so I said nothing. After a few minutes, someone suggested that we play 7 Minutes in Heaven, and of course, I got paired up with Caleb. Kate knew my bad luck with guys, and I think she had good intentions, but this was definitely not the right way to go about things. So we go into the bathroom and small things happen. By normal people's standards, I guess. Then we come out. I was very naive and knew nothing about anything sexual. It was a rude awakening and I wanted no part of it again. We didn't stay long after that. Nothing ever developed further between Caleb and I was glad. Fast forward to sophomore year of high school, I had completely forgotten about him. I was a totally different person at this point, super goth, career-oriented, as a budding opera singer, and very anti-relationship because I saw it as distracting from my goals. That day with Caleb had some very negative lasting feelings on me where sex was concerned, and I had become very afraid of it and ultra-protective of my virginity and innocence. I was not prepared for what I encountered that day, and it messed me up to a point where I couldn't even say the word sex aloud until I was married and pregnant with my first child. I'm 16 at this point, chilling in my room, when I suddenly get this mysterious text from an unknown number. It read, "Hey, sexy." I asked who it was, and he said, "I'll give you a hint. We had sex." I informed him that was impossible because I was a virgin, so he must have the wrong number. He says, "Well, we almost did." I again said that I'd never had almost sex with anyone. As naive as I was when I was 13, I would have never let it go that far. So he finally says, "It's Caleb, don't you remember me? We hooked up." And the memories came flooding back, and started saying some really gross things that were really triggering. Now I admit, I was on a bit of a high horse about my modesty, because I would not be taken advantage of again, and was proud to have my priorities straight. I lost my temper and told him, "How dare you think that I do anything with you? Leave me alone," and a few other choice words I sort of regret, which didn't go well. He lost it and started screaming over text about how stuck up I was, and then the kicker was, "Whatever, I know where you live. I'll come and end you if I want." I freak out and immediately call my dad crying. He came home from work and we called the police. They went and spoke to him, but ultimately did nothing. I got lucky in the fact that it scared him off, and I haven't heard from him since. Our school was enormous, so we never saw each other either, but it could have just angered him more, and something truly terrible may have happened. But yeah, to the slimy kid who thought it was okay to ask for a hookup 3 years after, please, what's wrong with you? Have you ever been followed? I mean, properly followed. A lot of people don't appreciate just how sinister it truly is to experience this. To look behind you to know that someone is right there watching your every move, waiting for who knows what opportunity to strike. I'll take you back 2 years. I went to the store late at night at around 9 or 10 due to my job. I appreciate it isn't that safe, but I do carry a taser and pepper spray with me for things like this. I should probably mention that I'm quite petite, only about 5 foot tall, and the dude in question is at least 6 foot and twice my size. But this started a while ago, perhaps a year before. You see, a man walked up to me while I was in the self-checkout and started asking me your typical questions. And then your not-so-typical questions, if I had a boyfriend and such, telling me he noticed me walking around and needed to tell me I was pretty, things like that. I lied and said I had a boyfriend just for my own safety, and took the compliment. I didn't think anything weird of it, until it happened again, and again, and again. Every time he used the exact same script, the exact same order, and always found me in very closed-off spaces. The first 3 times, he'd never even had anything to buy. The second time, I was on the floor of the makeup aisle, very vulnerable. He said the same thing again, and I politely told him I did have a boyfriend, but thank you. I thought it was a mere coincidence. The third time it happened, I was in the very corner of the store by the vegetables, with nobody near me. He says the exact same thing as the first 2 times, and I finally had to tell him. Every time you come up to me, you've always asked me the same thing and I've always told you no. I need you to leave me alone and never come see me again. The 4th time it happened, we passed each other, and he realized it was me, so he circled around and followed me to the medicine aisle. I pretended to look at bottles. Every time I took a step to the side, he would too. At that point, as soon as I saw him, I called up a friend, so I would have someone that could hear what was happening and tried to scare him off. I turned the corner, and I could hear him calling out for me, so I started walking faster. Believe it or not, I ended up running into a police officer in uniform, and even though he was busy and I felt bad for interrupting, I asked him for help. The officer walked me to self-checkout, and the man actually had the nerve to pick the counter right next to me. The officer walked me out to my car, and I could see the guy watching me in the parking lot, probably seeing which one was my car. The last interaction happened a little while ago. I was looking for something for dinner and walked out of the frozen food section across the makeup. Guess who walked past me at the same time? We crossed paths and I kept walking and checked over my shoulder. He was observing me. I freaked out and hid in the makeup aisle and poked my head out, and sure enough he was looking up and down the aisle to see where I went. I messaged my mum and a friend solely because I didn't know what to do. When I saw him turn, I went to find the manager, but I could hear his keys following behind me. The manager walked me to the checkout, and once again he picked the counter next to mine. The manager walked me out and he trailed behind me and watched me enter my car. I did a few circles to make sure no one was following me and drove home. Am I being stupid and overreacting? It's the 5th time it's happened now, and after the 3rd I reported him to a different manager, and he told me if he's ever in the store again he'll be removed or banned. But they weren't there tonight. Where do I go from here? The officer that helped me even told me that unfortunately he couldn't do anything else than walk me out. I know I shouldn't go in so late, but it's the only time I can. I know the guy's being creepy on purpose. I just wish he didn't have to. This happened around 2 years ago. I work at a store of a big fast food chain to pay for my university. Our staff changes frequently because a lot of students and migrants work at our place, so you don't get to know each other very well. Everyone has their own social life, and it's very, very rare for co-workers to establish friendships outside working hours. Still, you know the people on your shift, and the night shift has particularly few workers. One of my co-workers, Jasir, started to get interested in me. Not that I noticed. I'm young and dumb, like being friendly, and, important for later, have a hard time saying no. In December of 2019, our store threw a Christmas party at a pub. I went and had a great time, but I also made plans later for that night. Because of that, I wanted to leave early, which made Jasir also want to leave early despite the fact he neither needed nor planned it beforehand, which made me feel uncomfortable. Unfortunately, he didn't know how to get to the train station and I did, so I couldn't say no and just allowed him to tag along. When we arrived at the train station, it came to light, when there was no train he could take to get home. None. He did not check beforehand. He did not ask me. He just wanted to tag along with me. It was quite uncomfortable. Instead of taking the train to the main station, he got into my train and only out when I insisted he change trains at another big station. But oh boy, that was not the train of the title. But oh boy. In January of 2020, Jasir asked me out for a coffee and I agreed. I thought, he just wants friends. He doesn't have any of his own, and it'd be nice to make friends with co-workers from his point of view. If anything happens, I can just leave. And so I went. First it was okay-ish. We mostly talked about work-related stuff because we didn't share any hobbies. We are not even the same age, nor have the same mother tongue. Jasir didn't like talking about work or much else really. He started talking about how different I was from the other co-workers, how nice of a person I am, and how good my charisma was. Then he asked me if we could get to know each other better. I genuinely didn't want to, and still didn't. Jasir is not my type, neither as a person nor from his looks, especially his looks, even if I sound superficial. While I am in my early 20s, Jasir is at least in his early 30s, and I have no problem with age. Instead of telling Jasir a straight no, I told him I wasn't interested in having a boyfriend. He didn't take it that seriously and told me that I would change my mind. I told him I wouldn't. He, again, was not really on board with that opinion, so I elaborated my opinion 3 times in German and 1 time in English to get it very clear. He always changed to English if he didn't understand something, or if he misunderstood, even if he heard it clearly and just didn't like it. I mean, obviously my opinion is going to change if I explain in English rather than German. We let the conversation die, with him not being convinced. He quit soon after, and I foolishly assumed I was free. But whenever he came to my workplace to place an order, he would ask me out to eat something. And every time I would postpone, with whatever I said the time before, because of finals, because of travel, because of anything I could get my hands on. Then COVID-19 hit Germany in March, and I didn't see him anymore. I blocked him on all social media in April and hoped that would be the end of it. Today I finished my shift at 3 a.m. and left with my female and very Asian co-worker Wei to catch the next train. We take different trains, so we decided to wait at the main lobby until I needed to go to my platform. In that time, Jasir appeared. He just finished his shift and was on his way home. Wei asked him which train he needed to get, and he said he was walking home. While the conversation went on, I got closer to Wei to get some space between me and Jasir. Wei did not grasp how uncomfortable I was. She just walked away. What did Jasir do? He placed himself between me and Wei, right in my line of vision, and every fibre in my body felt how he barged into my personal space. I decided I could not take a private conversation with him and said, "Oh look, I need to get to my platform." I did this to end it, but Jasir followed me. Through the main lobby, through the train station, into the elevator and into the train. I was internally screaming and walked through the train until I saw another passenger. I sat down in the rows of seats next to me and Jasir followed. As if every bit of luck had just left me, the other passenger moved seats and went away, so I was back alone. Jasir spoke and spoke, and I showed clear signs of not wanting to continue the conversation. I hoped he would leave before the train departed, but he didn't. Mind you, the train goes in the opposite direction of his house, and it's an hour walking distance from my workplace. There's no way in hell this man could get anything out of taking the train except to follow me, just to keep talking to me and not with me. I was freaked out and told him in English he was actually being very weird. Maybe I should have used a different word, but English isn't my first language, and at that point I only thought about escaping. I could not let him see my station, or he could easily find out where I lived. I didn't live very rural, but at 3 a.m. there's no one on the streets, so following me home would have been relatively easy. I decided to get up at the next station, let him get out the train first, and then just stay inside as the doors closed. Fortunately it worked, but only after telling him clearly this was not my station. I would not get out, and he would not get back in. I even held my hand out to stop him from going back. He stayed outside after the conductor shouted at us to let us close the door. So let's rewind. He's older than me, but does not get the concept of me not wanting to be in a relationship with him, and whenever he doesn't like the answer, he just tries to speak in English because he thinks it's a miscommunication. He followed me twice into my train and almost to my house, without even thinking about just how creepy that is. Jasir, sincerely, let's never meet again. I love karaoke. It feels so expressive and cathartic to me that it helps me get through all of my bad days. I'm from a small regional town in Australia, so my choices for karaoke were very much limited to one underground bar a week. I went weekly, knew the regulars, and would occasionally drink until I had to do songs from pure memory, as the rest of my senses were shot. This was not one of those nights. I was wandering in with a friend of my sister's and a director that was auditioning me at this karaoke night, who also knew the other girl. I'm very socially anxious, so I kept to myself and ignored the strangers in the bar. I sang a few songs, got the part in the play, and my night wrapped up when a douchebag friend of the director's kept harassing the girl who was a year younger than me and about 45 years younger than him. I went to follow her because she was drunk and vulnerable, and there's no way I was going to leave her alone in that state. I got the douchebags that followed us away from her and promised the director and her friend that I would look after her and make sure she got home safely. God, I should have just left when she refused for a lift and insisted we find her friend. She calls up her friend who is on loudspeaker, and we both hear her swearing, screaming and crying. She runs and I go after her in case she needs my help. We find 3 guys walking away with this one girl sobbing on the ground bleeding as they had just punched her in the face. I watched as her friends helped her, and I turn my back on the guys to make sure we are walking away before I look back and they're all gone. Noticing the absence of the people, one of these guys just punched, and no one around, they started walking back to me and surrounding me, where at this point my fight or flight response turned into freeze or friend, and hopefully these dudes would go away. I'm immediately running through in my head if I should try and take them, but despite them looking a year younger, they were all taller and built from the gym, and 301 fighting should be avoided. One of the guys starts talking to me and saying that he was watching me at karaoke all night, and how wonderful I was and that I should join them, and he grabs my hand and starts tugging me towards a decrepit abandoned building with no light coming from the area. I pull my hand out of his and slowly just say, "Sorry, but I've got to go meet up with a friend. Lovely meeting you." What happened next sent chills down my spine and put me in a state of shock. One of the guys moved behind me to block my path, and the other friend blocked me from stepping around the main offender, and I just hear the words, "Oh, come on, Mary McClare, come with us. We know you come here every week." The guy starts to feel my breast and I step away. "We've come so far, and talking to the guy who runs the karaoke, we know so much about you. And I'm sure we'll bump into one another again if you don't come hang out with us now. To this day, I don't know how the hell I didn't just crap myself there and then. I maintained my poker face, and after 5 more minutes of this harassment and trying to pull me into the dark, which I refused to go to even if I had to punch them and risk myself getting beaten up, just kept edging away. Finally, the group of people had come back, and the drunk girl I was with started shouting obscenities and told me to run. I did a loop around a weirdly shaped post office and ran back to the karaoke place where I told them what happened and that the guys were still following me. They didn't believe me as they were inside the bar the entire time because it was winter and cold outside, and told me they couldn't let me in even if I was hiding from the guys, because no one is allowed to go back in after 11 PM no matter what. Absolutely sobbing at this point, I ran to my car and drove off with the guys watching me drive away. I see a police car stop beside them, which really stopped them from watching me, where I was driving, and get the hell out of there. I filed a police report 2 days later, with some of their words telling me that if I told anyone that they would find me, weighing heavily on me. Nothing ever came of it as the police didn't know where to start looking, and the cops, who stopped the guys never actually getting their names or realizing they were the dudes who punched a girl in the face, and the policeman who took my statement didn't give two craps, despite the more terrifying details of what they were saying to me for the 20-minute long encounter. In response to what happened to me, they never changed the 11 PM rule and just said, if someone asks, we'll walk them to their car. I said, are you even going to tell your patrons that this is an option for them so that they know and your staff know? I got a no, and only attended twice more after that, and to this day have not returned. And to the 3 guys on the street who ruined karaoke for me forever, and the scumbags including the director, I sincerely hope I never have the misfortune of meeting you again. I have strikingly red hair, and in my earlier encounters, I was dressing a bit more alternative. Glossy combats, flowery velvet pants, fur coat. I was always in black and always had strong makeup because I liked it. Strange encounters were not uncommon with me. I've had plenty of homeless men approach me and offer me money for stuff, and because of that I was more careful. Every single encounter that I was dragged into, some of my close friends had to know in case something actually happened to me. My first encounter was with this man, when it happened at the end of sophomore year in high school. I went to the cinema with 2 of my friends and we were watching Love, Simon. Months before I had dyed my hair red, and it was honestly the best decision of my life. For that occasion I went with the worst rainbow eyes you could think of. When the movie was over we exited the mall, and while we were talking a dude approaches us, tall, extremely thin in shorts and a t-shirt, with a big rose tattooed on his fist, and asked if we could borrow his phone for a quick call. My phone died out in the cinema, so I tell him no, as well as my other friend, but the third girl says it's okay and dials the number. He spoke into the phone about some money, and some Gucci jacket he wanted to buy with that money. When he hangs up, he turns to me and tells me I look like Bella Swan from Twilight, and how I have pretty red hair and asks for my Facebook. I was like, yeah, sure, I don't use Facebook anyway, and I searched up myself and pressed add. When I returned to my dorm, I opened Facebook and decided to scope the situation out and freaked out. He had this long rant about how no woman wants him, how they're all dumb because he's so beautiful and screwable and no one's noticing that, and I block him. This was June of 2018. After that, nothing happened. I forgot about him and all was well. In my junior year of high school, I went to McDonald's after school because that morning was when my boyfriend broke up with me and I wanted to treat myself so that I didn't cry anymore. And I was wearing makeup because I did cry during morning and I couldn't go to school like that. The summer I cut my bangs and grew my hair, I looked like a completely different person. I was minding my own business, watching some videos on my phone when someone violently taps on my tray. I look up and I see it's him. My blood runs cold. He delivers this creepy smile and tells me how beautiful I am, and asks me if I will be his girlfriend. I decline. He asks why, and then I say I'm taken. He says okay, and goes back to talking to someone on the phone. I resume eating and try to ignore how hard my heart is pounding. I alert one of my friends that's still in school next to the mall, and he says that his class is soon to be over, but if the situation escalates, he'll come over to pick me up. Not soon after, he taps again. He tells me, I played Eurojackpot, which is a big lottery game in Europe. I'm sure I'll win. I'll buy you anything if you want to, you just be my girlfriend. I decline. He asks me if my ex-boyfriend is prettier than him, and I say, yes. He just gets up and leaves. This was February 8th, 2019. After that, I found out about him from my friend. His name, some of his past. He's a known drug addict in the town. His father works as a lawyer on court, and no drug dealer wants to work with him because he knows he throws a lot of people under the bus. One cold evening, I was waiting for my boyfriend at a bus stop. I looked like a mismatched idiot with my fur coat on top of sweats, running shoes and a beanie, just rolled out of an afternoon nap. He approached me and flat out asked me to be his girlfriend. While I was declining, my boyfriend comes and asks what's happening while eyeing him up. The dude pales up, says goodbye and leaves. That was March of 2019. Starting my senior year, I found out even more. Basically, his parents didn't want him, so they just bought him a flat as a 12-year-old boy and left him to take care of himself. He fell into bad company, and that resulted in his speed, later heroin addiction, and the addiction probably triggered some mental problems, and people speculate he's probably schizophrenic because how often he was seen yelling at the air, like someone was there talking to him, and having a rapid body movement all the time. One of my friends saw his dad beating him almost to death in the parking lot, and people had to jump in just to separate them. One nice sunny day, my friend and I decided to doll up and go somewhere in the forest to smoke some weed. We went to a fast food place, ordered, and sat out to eat. In the middle of my bite, I hear someone yelling, "Hey!" I look in front of me and see him striding towards us. My friend is losing it and I start to feel panic creep over me. He steps on her side of the table and the conversation goes, "Hey." He greets and I just stare blankly at him because I'm still in shock. "How are you?" "Good." At this point I'm trying to get over this as quickly as I can because people are staring. "I was just going to someplace and wanted to ask if you want to come with me because I was going somewhere and I wanted to ask you. I'm busy right now, so no. Are you taken?" "Yes." I wasn't. I just didn't want him to harass me anymore. "Will you give me your phone number?" "No." And a question that made me lose my sanity and that sent me directly to anxiety attack. "After everything I've done for you?" "Yes." He says goodbye and leaves, yelling to someone in front of him who we can't see, and I start to cry as I feel overwhelmed. My friend was trying to calm me down. This was summer of 2019. Later on, I'm sitting at a bus stop on a wall. It was wash day, so I had some gym clothes on and was waiting for my friend from the incident before. I see someone sit at my feet. I look up and it's him, smiling at me. I straight up tell him that I don't have time for his nonsense today and that I wanted him to go. He yells at me that he was just sitting there and storms off. This was October 2019. After that, I'd only seen him around town in passing. I'd always hide my face when I'd see him going towards my direction so I can avoid him. I changed up my style a little bit as well, so that I wouldn't have to be noticeable in the crowd. My hair is still red. I don't want to dye it. I carry pepper spray and always try to walk the walk to seem unapproachable, and I don't have to go through unwanted conversations anymore. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories. If of course you did, it'd be great if you let me know in the usual way. I know that compared to some other stories, perhaps being followed and being made uncomfortable, isn't as scary. But I would like to say that when you're in this situation, it feels far more terrifying than you can perhaps appreciate just listening back to it. So just bear that in mind. It is really sinister to be followed. In fact, my wife and I were once being followed while in New Zealand. It was in the car though, not in person, but it was really, really creepy. The guy turned off his headlights, it was dark. I was starting to get really unnerved. I had to put on the brake light ever so gently just to see him illuminated, and he was meters from us. It was really quite disturbing. I never would want to live that again. He followed us for a really, really long time. Really long time. Proper scary stuff. Even if it doesn't sound that scary, when you're living it, when you're feeling the adrenaline, when you're scared for your life because you don't know what these people are going to do. It does get pretty harrowing. Anyway, guys, I'd like to extend a huge thank you to my members, patrons, and coffee supporters for your continued contributions and donations and help. It really does mean the world to me. Thank you. And yes, well, I just hope you liked today's video. I will be back with you on Saturday with a big compilation. So I'm looking forward to that, and I hope you are too. See you at the regular time then. Stay awesome. I'll see you in the next one.